Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Andrea Welsh. Hi Andrea, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
All good. It's great to have you here, first time on the podcast. So I think it makes sense to start with a little bit about who you are and where you're from.
Thanks for having me, Kieran. So I am a secondary art teacher. Been teaching in secondary schools for about 6 years. Did a little bit of teaching drawing and painting in colleges before that for a couple of years, so 8 years total teaching art. And really enjoyed it. It's been good.
Nice. I mean, art's one of those subjects that often gets overlooked at primary, so we're always trying to explore them in greater depth, think about more deeply about them. And I suppose my first question is, art is often overlooked in busy timetables. How does art contribute to the education and development of our pupils?
It's a real frustration for arts teachers, whether that's music, drama or art. We often aren't seen as the academic subjects. And when I was doing my teacher training, I actually saw that firsthand. I did a primary school placement, and because the students' abilities in writing and numbers was so poor, they had decided to axe basically all of the arts. So the arts consisted of the Christmas pantomime. That was it. That was the subtotal of it. So it was really sad. But you know, and again, I think another thing that stands out to me was when I was on my first placement and teaching students that were age 12, and they couldn't actually use scissors. And so that, I think, is fundamentally that comes down to not being exposed to just kind of simple art practice, crafts even from an early age. To get to that age and not be able to have those fine motor skills is quite scary, really, to think that that's the case. So, you know, would you like a dentist or a surgeon operating on you that didn't have fine motor skills? I don't think so. So fine motor skills from you know, preschool and elementary or primary, that's really, really important thing, just as a fundamental that can be taught through art. But I often sort of refer to learning through art rather than learning about art or learning art. There's so many transferable skills and attributes that when taught properly, when art's taught properly, through a proper creative process, the students are going to develop these. So if we think about problem solving, say for example, research and investigation, the students are constantly making mistakes, and they get really familiar with making mistakes and comfortable with making mistakes. The mistakes are often where the best art learning takes place, and so they get more comfortable with taking risks and the critical thinking that comes with that as well. So, you know, what am I doing? Is it working? What am I going to do next? And so those are skills that will then take those students through school and beyond school. So arts provides that really rich situation where they can be exposed to all of that. So I think that's really, really important. I mean, the other thing I think I like to do with all my students when I first meet them is I say to them, you know, close your eyes and imagine a world where you didn't have artists or designers, and what would that world be like? So if I asked you that, what would you say? Like, what would the world be like? What would we have or not have, Kieran?
Quite a lot of things, I think. You know, certainly like the best architecture. Yep. You know, the sort of the clothes we wear. You know, I'm trying to think of anything that we don't need people with that particular skill set to support us with. Yep,
the chair that we're sitting on, everything really. And so, of course, you know, they quite quickly realise how ingrained art and design is in every single facet of our lives. And of course, not all children are going to grow up to be artists or designers, but we're all consumers of art and design work. And so having aesthetic judgment, understanding the foundation of what is good design. When you're going to buy a sofa, has that sofa been designed with ergonomics in mind? Has the designer thought about not just how that sofa looks, but is it going to actually work with the contours of the body and provide you with good postural support? So there's that part of it too, which kind of plays into learning about looking at good design and looking at good art, and learning about what I call the kind of science of art in a way, the visual language as such, whether that's the formal elements and principles, composition, all of those different things. Art mirrors life. So when my students are learning about, we're looking at artists from a historical or a contemporary kind of perspective, they can start to see how it mirrors what's happening in politics or in society. And so through learning art, you can actually touch on pretty much all of the kind of subjects, because if we look at, say, for example, William Morris or Art Nouveau, that was a direct result of the Industrial Revolution and how the society was kind of, they were craving going back to using our hands and to kind of traditional crafts. And I think what we're going to see, my prediction is we're going to see something like that happening over the next 10 years with the introduction of AI and AI imagery. And I think that what we're going to see is we're going to see people becoming really tired of that very quickly and really craving the handmade and the hands-on approach of real art made by real people. So I think that'd be quite interesting. And then I suppose the last part of, learning through art, or what the art studio or the drama, workshop, the stage or the music room, and I would class myself as being one of these students at school. It's a sanctuary for some people. It's a place to escape. It's a place to explore who you are, what you're interested in. And for some of those students who find it hard to articulate themselves verbally, they can often find an avenue to explore and express who they are through the arts. So taking that away, it's not right.
I mean, that's pretty resounding, to be honest. You can say how passionate you are about it, but also when I think of art and the arts, I think of a very specific thing, but actually you've shown just how broad these are and how impactful they are. I was going to ask you about AI because there's lots of AI music being pushed on Spotify at the minute. I mean, how quickly do you think people are going to get tired of that stuff?
I mean, I really do not like AI imagery at all. I find it overly saturated. For me as an artist, I think it's very quickly recognisable as fake. I mean, maybe calling it fake is unfair, but that's how I see it. I think, like all AI, it will improve, but I don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch this space and see what happens. I think AI has its purpose. I was listening to a podcast and it was talking about a textile designer and how using AI to kind of quickly work through her ideas, she was able to do the work of what would not historically taken her 3 days in the space of like a couple of hours. So there's definitely ways to use AI to your advantage as a creative, but the actual final product I think still has to come from the artist themselves. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of the most, popular art pieces are like interactive experiences, certainly with modern art. So perhaps it's that's something that people will engage more with, and it all starts in primary school. Yeah. I mean, another thing that I've just kind of come to mind here was that going back to your original question, in the 70s in California, due to public funding cuts, the arts were axed. And then, 2 or 3 decades on, California obviously being the home of Hollywood, they had no creative talent, and so they had to start seeking overseas from Europe and beyond for their talent. So it's short-sighted.
I think on the part of policymakers, educators to axe the arts, because the creative industry does contribute to the economy in such a big way as well. So that's something I think that needs to be brought to the attention always as well.
What are the 4 key features of an effective art lesson?
So, not in any particular order, but I think that as a kind of basis, you're always going to have some sort of theory in there, and that could be, again, going back to that kind of idea of the sort of the science or the visual language. So bringing in something like colour theory or compositional techniques or something where you're building that knowledge base, I think that that's got to be an important part of any lesson. And then I think research or inspiration, something to spark curiosity, I think is really important. So that could come in the form of a theme that's going to maybe just be a word or like nature or space or something like that, or it could be an object, bringing in something that as a visual stimulus. It could also be looking at other artists' work. You've got to be careful with that one, and that the students don't just think that we're going to do a cookie cutout of like, well, here's Picasso, so we're going to do Picasso. But certainly looking at other artists or designers that are relevant to what they're going to be doing, so that you're sparking that kind of interest. And then nearly all of my lessons will have some sort of me doing a demonstration. If it's worthwhile, maybe actually finding a demonstration, video online. There's lots of those available now as well. So kind of like watching a process, whether that's a drawing technique or a printmaking technique, whatever it is that you're doing, there'll be a short demonstration. And then there needs to be time for the students to actually then, a good chunk of time for them to actually then go and do and actually be working through trying out those techniques themselves. And a final part would always be some sort of formative assessment. So that would take the form of perhaps just a conversation with me and the student. What are you working on? How's it going? What are you happy with? What are you going to do next? That kind of thing. Or it could be a little bit more structured, like a kind of pair up with the person next to you, 2 stars and a wish type thing. That works quite well. It's interesting in that students can always identify the positives and the challenges in somebody else's work a lot more readily than they can in their own. So it can be really valued to get them to switch up their work with others. And then another thing that I really like to try and create a culture of in the classroom, which is something that we do obviously in art school, but it plays an important role in schools too, is the studio critique. So that's a case of getting all the students down to the front. Actually, last year I had a sort of giant magnetic whiteboard, and I got some little mini magnetic whiteboard magnets, and so the students would come up and pin their work up on the board at the end or during the lesson, and they would kind of establish against the success criteria that we would have discussed, so they could kind of give themselves almost a kind of a grade on, whatever those criteria are. So all of those, I think some sort of assessment ongoing is definitely probably a 4th part to that lesson. And they can be in any kind of order. They don't all necessarily have to be in that order.
Yeah, so it's really clear, there's something new to learn here. You're tracking the whole time, how you're getting on, and then push them step by step. I mean, like sometimes I've worked in schools where we've had like a big piece every 6 weeks.
Yeah. What
are your thoughts on like how often pupils should be producing full pieces? Because I'm assuming that some of those lessons are just technique practice.
I think they should never really just work on one piece from start to finish. It should always be a proper creative process. Should be trying some things out first. So some test pieces. What that does is it allows the students the opportunity to try without fear, to be marked and assessed purely on their having a go at something as well. So following a step-by-step process. And that then builds the skills, builds the confidence, so that then when they hit the final artwork, they can hit it with more confidence and have a more success at it. So I think it just depends. I would usually just say, for example, on a project, maybe it would be a day or so, a lesson or so on kind of doing the creative mind mapping. Then we would maybe have a couple of lessons where we're sort of practicing techniques, and then maybe planning what their final artwork would be, and then maybe, depending on what it is, you could have, a few weeks on them working on a final piece. It varies a lot. It does vary a lot, but there should never really be a situation where the students are told, okay, well, you're going to be working on a painting, and you're going to start your painting today, and in 6 weeks you'll have a painting. That's not a proper creative process then. They need to have some time to be able to practice first, I think.
That makes total sense, yeah, because we try and shoehorn a lot of things into terms when really terms aren't how things fit. Even in history and geography, that kind of thing, we don't just have 6 weeks to learn about the Vikings or whatever. It needs to be extended over, and especially something like art, which is very much inspiration driven at times.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame because there could be a little bit of pressure on teachers for their classes to produce something visual. Schools love to put the artwork up, and so there's a temptation there to focus all energies and efforts on creating one final thing or one single thing, but they're missing the boat there, really. I think if they do that, it's a lot of pressure then for that one thing to be successful. So I would definitely urge to invest that time. It's time invested in the early stages for them to, and I also don't believe that a class should, and you do see this a lot, where at the end of a process or a term, you've got a whole class and every single student in the class's work looks exactly the same. That kind of cookie cutter approach, that for me strikes of like a kind of art factory rather than a proper personal approach to it. So that, by kind of having that earlier stage of try out the techniques, and they can copy something that you're doing there, then go away and ask the students to think about how they want to use those techniques to create their artistic intention, what that might be. So give them more scope for personalisation, so that you then have a class full of individual art pieces that represent the students themselves. That's more true to the creative practice. Harder though.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I'm pretty good at drawing Sonic the Hedgehog. That's where my art. I stopped developing my artistic skills in like year 6 or primary 7. What can I do if I'm not a very good artist but would like to be better?
Okay, well, it's a misconception that people can or can't draw. I think I often again will say I can't play an instrument, but if you were to give me a guitar and each week I was to learn a little bit more, had some tuition, I would eventually be able to play a tune.
Like languages?
The same thing. So anybody can learn to draw. Some people can pick it up quicker, but it's very much about dedication to it and practice. So you have to, I think a big part of it is accepting that most of the work that you do is going to be rubbish at the beginning, and not expect to be great at something off the bat. And even, as a working artist myself and an art teacher, I still, when I'm working in my own studio, I hate at least half of what I do. And I have to accept that at least half of what I produce, in my opinion, won't be good enough. But that's just part of the process. So not to be disheartened by that and not to quit. So that's one of the pieces of advice. I think there's so many resources now. So YouTube tutorials, books, courses that you can do. If you want to get better, then just commit to it. The same, like, you know, you mentioned their languages. You know, you want to commit to getting better at something. You know, you find a resource and stick with it. Yeah, and I think be authentic as well. If you want to kind of just to learn to draw, then of course copying work by other people has its place. If you want to create art, find your own voice. Take inspiration, but be like a boiling pot. You know, you're an individual. Find what makes you click, and then put your own stamp and have your own intentions, and so that you can create authentic work. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining the teachers who, because obviously model is a really important part, who may want to get better so they can model live, or they can, part of their feedback can be in a little bit of extra modelling. We've got this thing in maths where I often find that teachers who struggle with maths at school, because of the level of empathy they've got or understanding they've got of what it's like to struggle, they're some of the best subject leaders and often some of the best teachers I've seen in mathematics lessons. Do you ever see that in art?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that anybody who has a kind of a humbleness and accepts that, you know, the challenges of it, and is going to make for a better teacher, because they're going to have that understanding. And yeah, I mean, I've had students in tears over drawings, you know, and I just say, look, it's only a piece of paper. Don't, you know, really don't. It's not something to be upset about. And then I always say that, you know, I'll say, you know, I have bad drawing days, you know, and I'm an art teacher, so don't sweat this. Don't sweat it. It's just part of the process as well. But I think you do see a lot of teachers, primary teachers, who hate teaching art because they feel so uncomfortable. They feel like a block, and it's probably the same as if I was a primary teacher teaching math. I would feel quite scared about that as well, because it's something that I lack confidence in. So I think for those primary teachers who are in that position, find a primary teacher who is arty and collaborate with them and lean on them for help. There's loads of galleries and museums that offer workshops for your students. Take them somewhere, and quite often they're free. I went on loads of really good school trips, took students on, and they'll have an art tutor or an artist in residence there who'll work with your students. And also just embrace the learning with your students. So treat it as we're going on this learning journey together. We're going to go on this art journey together, and we're going to work through it. You know, and don't expect yourself to be the expert artist and to be able to draw just like your students. You know, you're going to work through that with them. I think it is always a good idea, if you are starting as a primary teacher and you are starting a project and you do feel really out your comfort zone, is take that time to try the process before you work with the students. And then that way you'll have worked through so many of the timing issues, perhaps potential stumbling blocks, and you'll also have some visual exemplars to show your students when you're actually introducing them to the topic as well. So that's something that you can do. I know it's a time investment, but again, I see that as time well spent for you if you feel like that you're not confident in it. So that's something else they can do.
Yeah, I always tell teachers to do maths in their spare time.
Yeah.
I think there's more chance of them doing art in their spare time, really.
Yeah.
So I think that's excellent advice. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, Andrea.
Oh, thank you.
And hopefully it'll be the first of many appearances on the podcast. Thank you for testing out the new microphone setup.
Sure, no problem at all.
All I have to do is say thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Kieran, for having me.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.